The old farm was supposed to be nothing more than a forgotten patch of land. A $150 gamble a soldier took to escape his loneliness. But when Declan Hayes pushed open the crooked wooden gate, with his loyal German shepherd, Valor, at his side, he froze. On the porch, two frail little girls in torn pink dresses clung to each other, their blonde hair tangled by the wind, their lips trembling. One whispered a single word that shattered his world: Dad. In that instant, the war he thought he'd left behind was nothing compared to the battle for family that had just begun. The Montana sky stretched wide and endless, a steel-gray canvas draped over miles of wild grassland and stubborn hills. The air was heavy with the smell of rain yet to come, sharp and metallic, a reminder that storms in these parts could roll down from the Rockies without warning. Declan Hayes gripped the wheel of his army green Ford pickup, its tires bumping over the rutted dirt road that wound toward the piece of land he had bought with the same reckless impulse he once carried into combat. $150, hardly enough to buy a good pair of boots. Yet it had bought him a farm, or at least the skeleton of one. The battered sign at the turnoff had once carried a family name, now faded to illegible letters. Declan Hayes was 40 years old, though his face bore lines that spoke of more than 4 decades. The harsh sun of deserts overseas had bronzed his skin. Scars along his jaw and left forearm whispered of firefights and missions where silence had been the difference between life and death. His hair, cropped close as if he still followed military regulation, was streaked faintly with gray, and his eyes, steel blue unflinching, were the kind that kept scanning, reading landscapes the way a book might be read for warnings. He had spent nearly 20 years in the U.S. Army Rangers, moving from conflict to conflict, until his bones ached with exhaustion and his chest was something harder to name: emptiness. Retirement hadn't been a choice as much as inevitability. The wars had ended for him, but the silence that followed was unbearable. In the passenger seat, if one could call it that, sat Valor. The German shepherd was 6 years old, his black and tan coat thick even under the dim light, his posture proud yet alert. Valor's amber eyes carried both suspicion and loyalty. They flicked between the windows, nose twitching constantly. Declan had found him as a scrawny pup outside a military base in Germany, ribs showing beneath his fur, eyes too tired for such youth. He had taken the dog in during his last overseas tour, trained him with the patience only soldiers could afford, and in return, Valor had given something more than companionship. He had become the anchor that steadied Declan when nightmares clawed their way into the quiet hours of night. Where men had betrayed, Valor had remained. The truck slowed as the road narrowed. Declan pulled to a stop at the rusted gate that sagged as if weary of standing. He cut the engine, and silence pressed in, broken only by the wind sighing through leafless branches. For a moment, he just sat there, the enormity of it filling him. This farm was supposed to be a new start, or at least a distraction from the echoing loneliness that no whiskey bottle had been able to drown. Valor gave a low rumble, nudging Declan's arm with his nose, as if reminding him that waiting wasn't in his nature. Soldiers moved forward, always forward. Declan stepped out, boots sinking slightly into damp earth, the smell of wild sage and mud rising instantly. His breath fogged faintly in the chill. Before him stood the farmhouse, 2 stories of weather-beaten timber, its white paint long surrendered to gray and peeling strips. The porch sagged, leaning like a drunkard toward the weeds that had swallowed the yard whole. Every detail matched the brief file he'd been given, a property long abandoned, forgotten by both family and law. And yet something wasn't right. It was Valor who noticed first. The dog stiffened, ears pricked, a low growl vibrating through his chest. Declan followed his gaze to the corner of the porch where a rope sagged between 2 posts, and hanging from it, swaying lightly in the breeze, were clothes. Not rags discarded long ago, but children's dresses, 2 of them, small, pink, faded from washing. Declan's pulse tightened. He scanned the porch again, and his eyes caught another detail. From the chimney, thin smoke curled lazily upward, dissolving into the clouds above. Not abandoned, he muttered under his breath. His hand slid instinctively toward his jacket, though the war was far behind him. Old instincts die slow. Valor moved ahead, paused silent despite the loose boards. Declan followed, every step cautious. He set his palm against the front door, the rusted knob cool under his grip. The wood creaked as he pushed, the sound echoing like a groan of protest. Inside, the house smelled of damp plaster and neglect, but beneath it lurked another scent, simple, fragile. Food. Declan's sharp nose caught the thin odor of watery soup. The main room was nearly bare, stripped of warmth. Dust clung to every surface. Yet on the wooden table in the center sat a small bowl, its rim streaked with dried broth. A spoon rested inside as if someone had set it down only moments before. Declan's gut clenched. This was no ruin. Someone had been here, perhaps still was. He listened. The silence was deceptive, broken only by the occasional whistle of wind through cracks in the boards. He moved carefully to the kitchen, Valor padding ahead. Through the smeared window, daylight slanted weakly, enough to reveal the soot-blackened hearth where faint heat lingered. A pot sat on the stove, still wet at the bottom. Declan touched it, then pulled his hand back quickly. The metal was warm. Someone had cooked here recently. His eyes narrowed. He had bought solitude, but solitude was nowhere to be found. Valor's growl deepened suddenly, his gaze fixed on the back door. Declan followed him outside. The backyard was a tangle of weeds, tall and untamed, but a narrow path had been carved through them, leading toward a sagging stone well. The sight would have been unremarkable except that the earth bore fresh prints. Small prints. Declan's breath stilled. At the steps of the back porch, two pairs of eyes appeared in the shadows. Wide, deep brown eyes, unblinking, framed by messy strands of pale hair. Then two small faces emerged fully into sight. Two little girls, identical in every feature, hair tangled into golden knots, cheeks dirt-smudged, lips pale from cold. Their dresses, both pink, were torn at the hems, and their knees were bare and scraped. They clutched each other tightly, their trembling giving away how long they had stood watching him. Declan froze, his body taut as if ambushed. His mind scrambled for sense. He had prepared for loneliness, not this. Valor, however, reacted differently. The dog lowered himself slightly, tail wagging cautiously, eyes softening. He gave a small whine, a sound of reassurance that carried no threat. The girls blinked, their fearful gaze shifting from the imposing soldier to the shepherd's calm presence. Declan opened his mouth, but before he could form words, one of the girls, her voice barely more than a breath, spoke a single word that would haunt him forever. "Dad." The sound cracked through him like a rifle shot, straight into the chest. He stumbled for words, for explanation, but none came. He had no children, no family. And yet, the word carried weight, as though it belonged here, lodged in this forgotten place. The other girl pressed her face into her sister's shoulder, whispering something he couldn't catch. Valor stepped forward a pace, looking back at Declan as though urging him to respond. The soldier felt his heart race in ways combat had never managed. The porch creaked beneath his boots as he took a careful step closer. The girls didn't retreat, but their eyes remained wary, like small animals, uncertain if the hand extended was salvation or danger. Declan crouched slowly, lowering himself to their level. His voice, hardened by command and battle, softened until it was almost a whisper. "Who are you?" he asked gently. "What are your names?" The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke and damp earth. For a moment, silence lingered. Then the first girl, the one who had spoken, parted her lips again, her voice hesitant, as if each word was fragile enough to break. "My name's Ellie," she said. Her sister's grip loosened, just slightly, and in a quieter tone, the second girl added, "Emma." Declan felt something stir inside him, recognition, though he couldn't explain it. Valor pressed his head lightly against Declan's shoulder, as if grounding him to the moment. The soldier looked at them, their frail forms trembling in the cold, and for the first time in years he felt a new war beginning. Not against enemies abroad, but against the unknown that had just whispered Dad into his life. The word Dad still echoed in Declan's chest, as though it had been carved into him by a blade. He crouched there on the sagging porch, Valor at his side, while the two girls stood pressed against one another, fragile forms quivering against the wind. For a long moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath. The crows perched on the fence stilled, the grass bent low and silent. Even the rusted chains of the gate stopped clanging. Declan had seen ambushes unfold in silence like this, but never had he faced one that struck so close to his soul. The girl who had spoken clutched her sister's hand tightly. Her hair, a tangle of gold curls dulled by dust and dirt, framed a face too thin for her age. Her lips trembled, but her eyes, deep brown, wide and searching, stayed fixed on Declan with something more complicated than fear. The other girl hid half behind her small fingers clutching the hem of her sister's tattered pink dress. They were identical, yet their expressions betrayed subtle differences. The first had a quiet bravery about her, while the second seemed weighed down by shadows she could not voice. Declan cleared his throat, his voice roughened not by fear of combat, but by something he could not name. "Ellie? Emma?" he asked gently, repeating the names they had whispered. The bolder of the two, Ellie, he guessed, nodded almost imperceptibly, while Emma pressed her face deeper into her twin's shoulder. Valor moved first. The shepherd's large frame lowered, ears relaxed, tail swaying in a careful rhythm meant to soothe. He padded across the porch, nose twitching as he approached the girls. Instead of flinching, Ellie reached a tentative hand toward him. Valor licked her fingers once, soft and deliberate, as though sealing an unspoken pact. Emma peeked out, eyes drawn by the dog's warmth, and her small shoulders eased ever so slightly. Declan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had relied on Valor in firefights, on patrols, in nights too dark to see, but this quiet bridging between broken children and a man who had no answers was a different kind of rescue. "Your mother?" Declan asked carefully. The question felt dangerous, like touching a wound. Ellie swallowed hard before speaking. "She's gone. A long time now." Her voice wavered, though she forced the words out. "A man. He brought us here. Said we had to stay." She stopped, eyes flicking toward Emma, who shook her head quickly as though warning her not to say more. Declan recognized that look. He had seen soldiers silenced by fear of punishment, words choked by invisible threats. Before he could press further, the sky cracked open with a jagged bolt of lightning. Thunder rolled over the fields like cannon fire, and almost instantly rain began to pour, heavy and unrelenting. The wind drove it sideways across the porch, soaking the thin dresses clinging to the girls' frail bodies. Valor barked sharply, turning his head toward the open yard. Declan didn't hesitate. In one motion, he scooped both girls into his arms, one clinging to each shoulder, their weight feather light but trembling with cold. "Come on, Valor," he commanded, and the shepherd bounded ahead, leading them across the slick grass toward the barn. The structure groaned as if ready to collapse under the storm, but it was the only refuge within reach. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay, wood rot, and animal musk. Declan kicked aside a pile of old boards and set the girls down on a mound of dry straw. Their dresses clung to them, dripping, lips chattering from cold. He shrugged off his own heavy coat and spread it over their shoulders. Emma burrowed into it instantly, eyes closing in relief, while Ellie forced herself to sit upright, though her shivers betrayed her. Valor circled once, then lay down squarely across the entrance, his massive body a barricade against whatever storm or intruder might try to force its way in. The dog's ears flicked constantly, every muscle ready, but his eyes stayed trained on the twins, as if swearing he would not let harm near them again. Declan rummaged through his rucksack, pulling out the last of his field rations. He had carried them for the road, a habit from years of always expecting shortages. Tearing open a packet, he poured dry oats into his battered canteen cup, added water from his flask, and set it on a small camp burner he still carried. The flame sputtered weakly but held. Soon the faint aroma of oatmeal spread into the barn. The girls watched silently, wide-eyed, as though unused to such a simple act of someone preparing food for them. Declan stirred slowly, letting the warmth rise. He remembered countless nights crouched over such meals in deserts and jungles, but never had oatmeal carried such weight as it did now. He poured the steaming mixture into 2 tin cups and handed them over carefully. Ellie accepted first, cautious yet polite. Emma hesitated, glancing at Valor. When the shepherd gave a soft huff, she reached out too, her small fingers brushing Declan's hand as she took the cup. The warmth of the food, the coat around them, and the steady sound of rain hammering on the roof began to soften the edge of their fear. Declan leaned back against a stack of hay, watching them eat. He forced himself not to press questions, though his mind raced. Who was the man who left them here? Why had they called him Dad? And why did he feel a gnawing pull in his chest that went beyond pity? The storm raged outside, rattling the barn doors. Valor lifted his head at every crack of thunder, ears high, but he never moved from his post. His chest rose and fell with steady breath, the image of patience and vigilance. At last, the girls finished their small meal. Ellie set the cup down carefully, whispering a soft, "Thank you," without meeting his eyes. Emma curled against her sister, eyelids heavy. Declan pulled a wool blanket from his pack, spreading it across them both. Their small forms huddled together, breathing deep, surrendering to exhaustion. In that dim barn with rain pounding above and the storm raging around, Declan sat awake long after sleep claimed the children. His hand rested on Valor's thick fur, and he stared into the shadows as memories stirred of Lana Price, the girl with chestnut hair and a smile he once thought he'd carry forever. He remembered leaving her behind when the army called. He remembered silence after. No letters, no explanations. Could these girls? The thought was too heavy to finish. Yet when Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't make out, Declan leaned forward instinctively, a soldier once more, but this time guarding a different kind of life. As dawn crept gray through the cracks of the barn, Declan realized the battlefield had shifted. The war outside was over, but a new one had begun here, in this forgotten place, with two fragile souls who had looked at him and called him father. The storm had spent itself by dawn, leaving the Montana sky washed pale, streaks of sunlight struggling to pierce through drifting mist. The barn smelled of wet hay and smoke from Declan's camp burner, and in the silence he could hear the slow, even breathing of the twins still curled together under his wool blanket. Valor had not moved from his post at the door. His fur glistened faintly with damp, his amber eyes alert but softened with weariness. Declan had spent the night half awake, his mind spinning with questions that the storm had only amplified. As the first shafts of sunlight crept across the barn floor, Declan crouched beside the twins. Their small hands had slipped free from the blanket, palms up, delicate veins tracing under pale skin. That was when his eyes froze. On each wrist, faint but unmistakable, was a red oval-shaped birthmark. His heart stumbled against his ribs. Declan raised his own hand, staring at the mark he had carried since birth, a quirk of blood vessels his mother used to call his soldier's seal. For 40 years, he had never seen it repeated, until now. He touched his wrist absently, his chest tightening. The girl stirred under the blanket. Ellie blinked awake first, brown eyes hazy with sleep. Emma shifted beside her, clinging to her sister before peeking out cautiously. Declan tried to steady his voice. "Where did you get those marks?" The girls looked down, puzzled, as though they had never thought of them as strange. "Mommy had one too," Ellie whispered, rubbing at her wrist. "She said it meant we belonged to her." Before Declan could reply, Emma shuffled closer, clutching something wrapped in a scrap of cloth. She held it out with both hands, her expression solemn. "This is Mommy's," she said. Declan carefully unwrapped it to reveal a small wooden box, worn smooth from years of use. The hinges squeaked as he opened it. Inside lay photographs, a few folded letters, and a ribbon still faintly scented with lavender. His throat tightened as he lifted the first picture. The photo showed a young woman with chestnut brown hair cascading over her shoulders, her smile warm and familiar, eyes as blue as the Montana summer sky. She held two infants swaddled in blankets, their identical faces unmistakable even in newborn form. Declan's vision blurred, his grip tightening around the photo. It was Lana Price, his Lana, the girl he had kissed beneath the bleachers in high school, the one who wrote him letters during his first months in the army before the silence had grown too deep to cross. He had not seen her in nearly a decade, and now she was gone, leaving behind proof of something he had never known, two children who might be his own flesh and blood. Declan's breath caught, and Valor pressed his head against Declan's arm, grounding him. The dog's presence reminded him that panic was no ally. He looked back at the girls. Ellie's gaze was steady, searching his face for answers, while Emma clutched the edge of the coat he had given them, as if bracing herself for disappointment. Declan forced a slow exhale. "Your mother's name," he said carefully, though he already knew, "was Lana?" Both girls nodded, Ellie's voice barely audible. "Lana Grace Price. She sang to us every night. Then one morning she was gone. The man said she wouldn't be back." Emma's lips trembled, but she pressed them tight as if she had been warned not to cry. Declan clenched his fists against the flood of memories Lana's laughter, her voice calling him reckless, the way she had waved goodbye at the bus station when he left for his first deployment. If the timing was true, if the girls were 6 years old, then everything aligned with the leave he had taken before deploying overseas again. Declan needed answers, and there was only one place to find them. The nearest homestead belonged to Martha Collins, a widow in her 70s known in town as a keeper of stories. She had lived all her life in Bozeman, her husband gone a decade now, and though her frame had grown frail, her eyes remained sharp, carrying the resilience of a woman who had survived both frontier hardships and modern solitude. Declan loaded Ellie and Emma into his truck, Valor climbing in behind them, and drove slowly down the dirt road. Martha's house was a small clapboard structure nestled behind towering maple trees. The porch sagged, but the flower beds were still neatly kept. When Declan knocked, she opened the door herself, her white hair braided back, apron dusted with flour. Her lined face lit briefly in curiosity, before darkening with recognition of Declan's name. "You must be Declan Hayes," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "I remember you, Lana's boy." The words struck like a hammer. Declan cleared his throat, introducing Ellie and Emma, who clung nervously to his sides. Martha's eyes softened as she bent down, cupping their cheeks with weathered hands. "Poor little lambs," she murmured, voice breaking. "They've carried too much sorrow." Over steaming mugs of tea in her small kitchen, Declan asked the questions that had haunted him. Martha's expression grew grave. "Lana fought a cruel illness. It took her 3 years ago. She was strong as an oak, but when it came fast. She never spoke of their father, only said he was far away, serving. After she passed, a man started coming. Carl Dawson, rough sort, never one for kindness. He brought food sometimes, but he kept the girls hidden. Folks assumed he was kin, though no one truly knew." Ellie and Emma sat quietly, their small hands folded in their laps. Valor lay at their feet, his eyes never leaving the doorway, ears twitching at every sound outside. Declan noticed the dog's posture tense, his nose lifting. Excusing himself, Declan stepped outside. The ground still held the storm's dampness, and across the mud by the gate were fresh tire tracks, wide, heavy, different from his own truck. Someone had been watching, and recently. Valor barked once, sharp and low, confirming the unease crawling up Declan's spine. Back inside, Martha lowered her voice. "That man, Carl, he wasn't family. I saw the way he looked at the girls like burdens, not blessings. He left them alone more often than not. When I asked, he said they were better off at the farm than in town. But Declan, I always wondered why he lingered there. Maybe because of the money. The state sends checks when a parent dies. A cruel man could find a way to pocket them." Declan's jaw tightened, rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. He glanced at the twins, Ellie with her quiet resilience, Emma with her fragile trust. If Carl was using them for his own gain, then this wasn't just fate. It was a battle, and one he would fight with every ounce of training and will he had left. As dusk settled, Declan returned with the girls to the farm. He repaired the broken latch on the barn, Valor pacing the perimeter with his nose pressed to the ground. The dog found another trace discarded cigarette butts near the fence line, still damp but fresh. Declan pocketed them silently, his soldier's instinct sharpening. Someone had been close enough to watch them through the storm. That night, as the twins slept curled together, Valor lay between them and the door, his body a silent guardian. Declan sat by the flickering fire in the kitchen, Lana's photograph resting on the table beside him. The resemblance was undeniable, the eyes, the birthmarks, the timing. Shadows of the past pressed close, but within them flickered a new light. For the first time in years, Declan Hayes felt something stir beyond grief or emptiness. He felt the weight of responsibility, the pull of blood, and the whisper of a destiny he could no longer ignore. The day after his visit to Martha Collins' home, Declan felt the air around the farm grow heavier, as though the land itself sensed the storm to come. He had patched the broken latch on the barn and cleared the yard with Ellie and Emma trailing behind him, their tiny rakes dragging clumsily over the weeds. For a fleeting moment, he let himself imagine the place restored, laughter echoing off the fences, the girls chasing Valor across a field once more alive with wheat and sunflowers. But such peace never lasted long in his life. It was mid-afternoon when the sound came, low at first, then rising into the steady grind of an engine. Declan straightened from the fence post he was hammering, his ears sharpened like a soldier back on patrol. Valor froze, ears pricked, a growl rumbling low in his chest. Dust swirled on the dirt road, and soon an old dark green pickup rolled into sight, its body dented, its tires heavy with mud. Declan's jaw tightened. He already knew who it was before the truck stopped at the sagging gate. Carl Dawson stepped out first. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered but gone soft in the gut, the kind of man who once had strength but now carried it mostly in bluster. His beard was unkempt, streaked with gray, and his small eyes glinted with suspicion and meanness. His leather jacket was worn, reeking of tobacco and stale whiskey even from a distance. Behind him climbed out another figure, Gary Holt, taller, younger, early 30s, built like a farmhand hardened by years of labor. His hands were thick-knuckled, his face blunt and expressionless, though his eyes moved with the sharp calculation of someone used to doing dirty work for others. Carl's boots crunched over the gravel as he pushed open the gate without asking. His voice carried a rasp that scraped the air. "Where are the girls?" he demanded, scanning the yard until his gaze landed on Ellie and Emma standing frozen on the porch steps. Instantly, they darted behind Declan, clutching his legs. Valor surged forward, hackles bristling, planting himself between the strangers and the children. His bark exploded into the air, sharp and thunderous, a warning no man with sense would ignore. Carl stopped short, his sneer curling. "Call your mutt off. I'm their stepfather. Got every right to take 'em back." His words dripped with entitlement, but his eyes avoided Valor's teeth. Declan didn't move. His voice was low and steady, honed by years of command. "Stepfather or not, you've left them here alone. They don't want to go with you." Gary took a step forward, fists flexing, but Valor lunged a pace closer, his snarl vibrating through the ground. Gary froze, glancing uneasily at Carl. For all his size, he wasn't eager to test a trained shepherd's bite. Carl spat onto the dirt, his temper flaring. "You don't know what you're talking about. I've been raising them since their mama died, feeding them, keeping a roof over their heads. That's more than anyone else has done." Ellie's small voice broke through, trembling but clear. "You never played with us. You just yelled." Emma added, her face hidden against Declan's leg. "And you said we were a burden." Declan's heart hardened at their words, but he kept his tone even. "If that's true, why keep them?" Carl hesitated just long enough before snapping, "Because the state pays for it. Welfare checks. They're worth more that way than any other." The confession slipped out in his arrogance, and Declan saw the truth settle like poison in the air. Declan stepped forward slightly, his presence filling the space between the children and the intruders. "That ends now. You're not taking them anywhere." For a tense moment, no one moved. Rain clouds gathered again overhead, thunder muttering at the horizon. Carl's lip curled, but some instinct, perhaps Valor's unrelenting growl or the steel in Declan's eyes, made him back down. "This ain't over," Carl spat. "I'll be back with papers. Then we'll see who has the right." He jerked his head at Gary, and the two retreated to the truck, tires spitting gravel as they sped off down the road. The silence that followed was thick. Ellie clung to Declan's sleeve, Emma to his waist, both trembling. Valor remained at his post, staring down the road long after the truck disappeared, only relaxing when Declan laid a hand on his shoulder. That night, the farmhouse was cloaked in uneasy quiet. Declan sat at the kitchen table, a single lantern burning low. In front of him lay a folded envelope, the kind soldiers carried for emergency orders. He had cut strands of Ellie and Emma's hair while they slept, careful not to wake them. Valor lay on the floor beside their bed, chin on his paws, eyes open and alert as though sensing the importance of the moment. Declan placed the hair samples into the envelope along with his own, sealing it tight. He knew of a clinic in Billings that could run the test quietly. The drive would be long, but necessary. 3 days later, he returned with the results. The rain had begun again, steady and cold, drumming on the roof as he opened the letter. His hands, steady under gunfire, shook as he unfolded the paper. One line stood out, bold and undeniable. Probability of paternity. 99%. He sat back heavily, staring at the words until they blurred. Ellie and Emma Grace weren't just two lost girls abandoned to fate. They were his daughters, his blood. Valor nudged him, sensing the storm within. Declan reached down, gripping the dog's neck, grounding himself in the loyalty that had never faltered. He rose, carrying the paper to the bedroom. The twins stirred as he tucked the blanket tighter around them. Emma mumbled in her sleep, "Daddy?" The words, soft and unknowing, struck him like a promise. For the first time in years, Declan Hayes let himself believe in family again. The days following the arrival of the DNA results were restless ones. Declan carried the folded paper in his breast pocket as though it were a medal earned on the battlefield. It was proof, but more than proof, it was a lifeline. The evidence that the bond he felt toward Ellie and Emma was not some desperate illusion, but blood, destiny, and truth. Yet even with the results in his hands, he knew the fight was not over. Carl Dawson would not walk away quietly. Men like him thrived on intimidation and greed, and Declan had seen enough of his kind overseas to recognize the threat. The morning Carl returned, the air was heavy, the sky bruised purple with a storm that had not yet broken. The same old truck rattled into the yard, but this time he was not alone. Beside him sat a man in a dark gray suit, thin, sharp-featured, with glasses perched low on his nose. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the slow arrogance of someone used to bending small-town courts to his will. His name was Richard Fallon, a local attorney in his late 50s. Fallon had a reputation, clever with paperwork, slippery with truth. His graying hair was slicked back neatly, and his mouth formed a constant half-smile that never reached his cold eyes. Carl slammed the door of the truck and marched forward, waving a stack of papers. "Got the proof right here," he barked, shoving the documents into Declan's face. "Legal guardianship, signed and sealed." Declan didn't flinch. Valor rose instantly from where he'd been lying by the porch, standing tall, his deep growl vibrating through the air. The twins, who had been playing in the yard, darted behind Declan, their trust in him now absolute. Declan's voice was calm, steady, the voice of command. "You've had your chance to care for them, and you failed. This time you'll answer in court," he signaled, and a woman's voice spoke from behind him. Samantha Davis, an attorney in her mid-30s with dark hair cut neatly at the shoulders and a steady, no-nonsense gaze, stepped into view. She carried a slim binder under her arm, her posture upright, her stride purposeful. Samantha had grown up in Montana, the daughter of a rancher and a schoolteacher, and had earned her reputation as an advocate for children in difficult custody cases. She believed fiercely in fairness, shaped by a childhood where she saw her own neighbors lose children to neglectful guardians. Declan had sought her out quietly days before, and she had agreed to take on the case without hesitation. Carl's sneer faltered when he saw her. "What's this? Thought you were just some lonely soldier squatting on land you don't deserve. Now you got a lawyer?" Samantha stepped forward, her voice firm and clipped. "Not just a lawyer, evidence, witnesses, and a DNA test." She handed Fallon a neatly copied folder, her expression unyielding. "Your client has no biological connection to these children, and ample evidence suggests he's neglected them for years." The tension in the yard thickened, Valor stepping between Declan and Carl as the two men glared at one another. Fallon adjusted his glasses, flipping through the folder, his face unreadable. "Then we'll see what the judge thinks," he muttered at last. The hearing at Gallatin County Courthouse drew more attention than Declan had expected. Word had spread quickly, Small towns always carried stories on their winds. The courtroom was an austere chamber, wood-paneled and smelling faintly of varnish. Judge Henry Callahan, a man in his 60s with a silver beard, and the slow, deliberate speech of someone who valued caution over haste, presided from the bench. He had lived in Montana his whole life, a man of the plains, stern but not unkind. Declan sat on one side with Samantha and the twins, Valor lying quietly at his feet, his presence unusual, but permitted by the judge as a comfort to the children. Across the room sat Carl and Fallon, Carl's scowl fixed like a mask, Fallon whispering constantly into his ear. The proceedings began with Fallon presenting the guardianship papers, but Samantha rose immediately, pointing out their inconsistencies. Dates that didn't align, signatures that were smudged, a notary's seal long expired. Then came Declan's turn. He stood and placed the DNA results on the bench, his voice unwavering as he explained how he had found Ellie and Emma abandoned, how he had discovered the truth of their mother, Lana Price, and how the test confirmed what his heart already knew. Witnesses followed. Martha Collins testified with trembling hands but steady eyes, recounting how Lana had confided in her about the pregnancy years before, and how Carl had never shown true care for the children. Robert and Lucy King, the neighbors, confirmed Carl's neglect, recalling how he dropped food but rarely stayed, and how Lana had once received letters with military postmarks just before the children were born. Then the most powerful testimony came from Ellie and Emma themselves. With Valor pressed close to their knees, they stood together, their small voices carrying across the hushed courtroom. Ellie spoke first, recounting how Carl had shouted at them, called them burdens, and left them hungry for days. Emma added through tears that Carl's girlfriend had once locked them in a dark room when they cried too loudly. The judge's face hardened, his pen pausing over his notes. When Fallon tried to counter, his arguments rang hollow. The community's whispers had already judged Carl, but it was the children's words that sealed his fate. Judge Callahan leaned forward, his voice stern but final. "Mr. Carl Dawson, it is the judgment of this court that you are unfit to serve as guardian. Custody is hereby transferred to Mr. Declan Hayes, the biological father of Ellie Grace and Emma Grace." His gavel struck, a sound like thunder rolling through the chamber. Carl erupted in protest, but officers moved in quickly. His voice cracked with curses as he was led away, Fallon trailing behind with his briefcase, his composure broken for the first time. Declan knelt, pulling the girls into his arms. Their tears soaked his shirt, but for once they were tears of relief, not fear. Valor barked once, sharp and triumphant, as though he understood the victory. Weeks later, the farm was no longer a place of decay. With Valor at his side, Declan repaired the sagging roof, mended the fences, and cleared the fields. Samantha stopped by often, sometimes bringing books for the girls, sometimes simply to check in. Ellie and Emma filled the yard with laughter, their pink dresses replaced with sturdier clothes, but their joy unmistakable. They played endless games with Valor, who chased them across the grass, patient and watchful, never straying far. One afternoon, Declan stood on the porch, watching his daughters race through the yard with the shepherd bounding after them, the sun gilding their hair in gold. He leaned against the post, a peace filling him that no battlefield had ever delivered. For the first time in his life, he was not fighting for survival. He was fighting to build, to restore, to love. The $150 farm, once a gamble, had become a home. A soldier's wandering had ended here, not with silence, but with the laughter of children and the loyalty of a dog who had guarded them through every storm. Sometimes the greatest battles are not fought on distant fields, but in the quiet corners of home, where love must stand against neglect and loyalty must outlast betrayal. Declan thought he had left war behind, yet it was here, in the laughter of two little girls and the steadfast heart of a dog, that he found his true victory. This story reminds us that family is not always given, but it is always worth fighting for. Tell me in the comments what family means to you. And if this journey touched your heart, please like this video and follow our channel so we can share more stories of hope and courage together.